go with this, but I actually think, as everyone knows, like, put it this way, I'll give people a little bit of insight into who I am as a person, right? I have, as I've gotten older, mellowed out just a little bit. Just if you knew what I was like before, I was way worse. Just a little bit. But part of mellowing out is like, you know, now I have a bit more patience. I can lean into things. When I was young, I was the sort of person who was super impatient and impulsive. Like, for example, like the joke would be, even when I would get into like, you know, like some rock or like metal band, I would always be like, no, what are all these like fucking ballads and shit and acoustic track? Where's all the hard shit? I just want to, you know, I was like, I just wanted that like all the time, right? So basically, same style. We're not going to ease into the show. Let's just go straight into the heart of this motherfucker. So here's my question to you, Yamato. Even though I will say he didn't do it in both these games this week, you can't blame both of them on him. It is time for the Yamato Cannon Defense League to actually take up its arms, because you're going to have to explain to me in 2024, Yamato. You were coaching this guy in 2022. In 2024, Vitality's Hylissang, are you ready? Is inting a few games. Now, you might be familiar with this behavior / playing style, as some have dubbed it, right? As I say, he didn't actually do it both games this week. One of those was nothing to do with it, his loss. But he's obviously had as a split again. He's having some issues. People, I mean, his problem always, this is why actually, as a more serious topic, I do want to talk about this. His problem always will be, Yamato, since he is sort of like a playmaker / someone who through the engage starts fights, etc. If you lose those fights, you're always going to look like you were wrong, and you're always going to look like you're the one that entered the game. So I will say, even at his best, he always was set up to potentially be the guy who gets blamed. But I want to get where you're at on this one, because obviously we've had years. You had a split back in 2022. I would say last year, I'd forget which exact one, maybe the first one. There was one where Hylissang was having problems with cars. He's had his splits throughout the years where people have said he's running it down and it's criminal, blah, blah, blah. But the sad thing is, actually, most people agree last split he was pretty good. He sort of had it back together again. They were getting it together. It's actually why everyone was quite hyped when the Lincoln Sky was joining this team. I thought it's like the last piece. Maybe this really is what Vitality's promised to be the whole time, which is like a top 3 team. Obviously, they aren't at the moment, and so some people think Hylissang's progressed. Where are you at on the Hylissang thing currently? Where are we at, mate?
I definitely think that this is probably, like, in terms of his individual performances, like, weakest year in terms of his career. I think Hilly as a player is very unique, because I think early on in his career, he was a heavy outlier, and he was like ahead of the curve in terms of how he approached the game. Like, I remember like how you prepared for Hilly was basically, you just told your teammates, like, if Hilly is missing, he can be anywhere. And at the time, it was such a wild thing to tell your players, because it was just not something that people did. It's like people open on bot and open sometimes on mid, and it's like when they did, it was like, wow. And I think for the longest time, I think Hilly is a player that needs to feel like there's concrete direction within the game, and also he needs to feel as if he is completely trusted in what he does. And then the third is that I think Hilly, in off seasons, likes to distance himself from the game, like, a lot. He like takes time off the game and then he jumps into the season. And then in that process, for example, and for us for 2022, when he was getting back into form, like, this is where bonds need to be built and trust needs to be made. And depending on how you view your teammates in that certain element, because Humanoid and Hilly were very incompatible.
Right.
Like, Humanoid had one way of playing the game, and he just viewed Hilly at the time.
Put it this way, Yamato, just from things I've heard, let me just say this, and you could obviously you can't say everything behind the scenes. I've just heard essentially Humanoid is the sort of person who does think he has a very strong game knowledge, and the idea would be in a review, he's the person who'll tell you, I don't think you did that right, or this is wrong, whatever. So as a result, like, it does seem like naturally he's not going to understand a lot of the moves Hylissang's making. I see what you mean. They seem like chalk and cheese, as we were saying. They don't really fit, right? Because to him, I'm guessing he thinks Hylissang's making like the wrong decision all the time or something, or he doesn't understand what he's doing, right?
And the reason I brought up 2022, because I'm pulling from like my time working with him, is because like he as a player in that environment where Humanoids has a very certain way of playing, and Humanoid has also a way of working. Like he will do his part as a player, but he will quickly give up on the part of him being a teammate if he feels like, if he puts effort into you, like understanding something, and it doesn't work maybe the second, the third time, he will like distance himself.
Does he have trust issues?
Very cold.
Does he have trust issues? Right.
I would say he has trust issues. Right. I think like individually super talented, but as a teammate, he doesn't have that force to drive teammates. But nevertheless, back to Hilly. Hilly, I imagine in this team, what's so strange is that like the conditions that they find themselves in are often very good. It's like they come out of early game, they come out ahead. They lane well. I think that Hilly and Kazi lane well most of the games. It's usually, like, for example, the last Alistair game that he played, there was 0-0-6. He was like finding some good angles. It was looking like a classic vintage Hilly game. But then over time, how I recognize it from my experience is that Vitality the whole year as mid-game, late-game approach, it seems like there is a clear lack of like direction. There's just no lack of direction. And I think if Hilly feels like there's no direction in the game, he's only going to view the game through the lens of his own champion. And this has been like a weakness and the big strength of Hilly. It's like when Hilly had moments, like for example, playing Leona, there's this meme I always pull up on like the SAC streams, is like say, like he was in the game, enemy AD has no flash cleanse. And in the game, Hilly said, because no one was talking, guys, I have a Giant's belt. This guy has no flash cleanse. This is the strongest I'll ever be in the game. If we don't fucking fight now, we are gonna lose the game. The thing is, in the game, we were like scaling. Like our AD was hitting 2 core, 3 core. We were like scaling better. And Human was like, what the fuck are you saying? But Hilly's looking at the game through the lens of his own champ. And I'm feeling now with Vitality, I thought that with Linsas coming into the picture, I thought that, they worked with him in the past, they know how he functions, maybe they add him to add that structure that is necessary. And I think that when that structure is not there or not clear to Hilly, he takes it into his own hands and sometimes in very, very absurd ways. Because I think he likes to play a very active game. And if it's not clear what direction of the team is going, I think that he suffers as a player. And this is my description of Vitality as a whole right now, is that they just lack structure altogether as the game progresses. There's no ideas, like Veteo dies on side, how they contest mid, the jungle support looked a little bit better the previous week, looked a little bit the same in terms of this week. And they're just missing that part, I feel like. And I think this is where Hilly looks very, very weak as a player as the game progresses.
Because the funny thing is, another thing I wanted to address on this topic to like also broach into like some of the issues Vitality's had constructing this roster would go like this. I look at this squad and I've heard so many stories about Hylissang teams in all his different teams over the years. And what I notice is everyone actually seems to have a similar perspective to me, which is it's actually the opposite to what a fan would say. A fan would think naively what you should do when Hylissang ints in a scrim, for example, is you should actually literally sit him down, show him like, look, it's an int, don't do that. And then essentially like over time, they hope you'd sort of like tame him, as it were, right? But I actually know every coach who's had success with this guy says it's the opposite. Essentially, it's the premise of like the wild Mustang horse. Like, look, you maybe want to ride it at one point, but you don't actually want it to be like a totally broken horse. It's just like in the stables doing nothing, because then it won't be a Mustang. It won't be like that speed and strength and power. To some degree, essentially, you just got to sort of like work with it, and you're not going to be too harsh and didactic and tell it how to teach it. Essentially, basically, I've sort of heard it described like this. Hylissang's more like you keep his mental in a good place. It's more like you coach the others to play with Hylissang, and then he does his shit, right? Like the downside of that, obviously, Yamato is, right? And by the way, I do agree with that. I do think actually if you sort of beat it out of him, well, then he won't get any brilliant engages, so you won't have any of the upside. You won't have at that point, you won't have Hylissang. You'll just have an ordinary support. So the downside, though, of that approach is it does mean essentially that like now the question is, who is the rest of your team, not who Hylissang is. So one of the problems is traditionally people would make the mistake of thinking, well, the bot lane's just about does the support pair with the AD? Well, look, we've nailed that already. Him and Kazi have had a great time the last year and a half. The problem you have now in League is his style of play. I also think a factor as well is like back in the day, not that many people did all these roams. Everyone does now. So now everyone, first of all, expects it. Like you said, it's not even like some unknown quantity. And also like he's not even the best at it at the moment. So it's not like the upside's there. So the real problem I think you have now if you construct rosters is suddenly it's the other relationships that look off. Like, for example, the first thing I'd have on my like board if I'm going to consider signing Hylissang in the future, and I think this is the mistake Vitality's made, is my number one thing I want on my team if I'm getting Hylissang is I better have a jungler that understands how to play with this guy. Because I think the big mistake you've clearly made in Vitality is putting all these rookies with him. People who've never played with a player like that. Remember, there's no player in the RL who's going to have had a similar style. And then I'd even say maybe in this team, you could even argue, same thing with mid laner. Maybe he needs a mid laner that wants that style or who knows how to set him up or the guy. Because I feel like, again, unless you're just going to kick the guy, there's no really way, like, he's done it for too long, guys. He actually has played this way for like 10 years with differing results, obviously. So, like, you're not going to make him tomorrow become like a safe support. And also, like I say, if he was a safe support, what's the point in having Hylissang? Why don't you get some guy out of an ERL who plays range supports at that point? You know what I mean?
No. I'm with you. Like I'm thinking back, like 2021. It's like Whippo and Hilly it's like the whole premise of Whippo jungle was the fact that I'm putting Whippo in proximity to Hylissang, because they understood each other at a level that was so insanely rewarding.
I believe he even said not that long ago, on stream or in an interview, that one of the reasons he wanted to do the role of jungle was also because he really liked to team up with Hylissang, basically. And the joke is, even as a top player, he used to have come bot lane all the fucking time anyway. So you may as well be closer on the map, I guess, right?
No. Like I think that you need to be really bought into what Hilly can do, because like his career is immaculate. It's like every team that he's been on besides Vitality has made finals, has won the league. Like Unicorns of Love was a fantastic team. Like they made so much like leeway in the league somehow with the players that never did anything ever again besides on that Unicorns of Love roster, whether it's Vardags, Exile. It's like PoE had a career and Kikis had a career with it also, whatever. Hylissang has an incredible career, and I think you really need to. And in my mind, when I look at this roster, it's like they put in first Douglas, right, which was something that they just carried over from the previous year. Linkas as well. It's like I had the privilege to watch like scrims against Linkas, so I could see like the angle somehow. And then I got excited because I didn't know about the relationship Linkas had with Pads and of course Mac, and maybe they saw something to add to the structure. So I was like bought in. I rated them way higher than I should have, because it's really not working out. And I think like the main thing for me as well, when I look at this roster, I feel like when you have this bot lane and you have Photon already, like the mid laner needs to be a person that is more of a giver. I feel like a big hole in this Vitality roster the whole year, in my mind, has been the mid lane. I feel like Vitio has been very invisible after what I thought was like a breakout split in, of course, last year with Team Heretics. But that's also like Vitio was put together with the Yankos. And then you have Vitio now together with Linsas. And I think that these are players that aren't necessarily players that build roads. I feel like if you kind of mix maybe the Team Heretics roster and the Vitality roster somehow with the players, maybe you can piece together something that is way better, right? I can imagine a Yankos on that team with Viteo, and then all of a sudden Vitality would just be a completely different team.
I want to ask you what you think on the Photon one, because people will know I'm a fan of this guy, because spoiler, if you did like the Venn diagram of what I like in top laners, people are really good at laning, carry top laners. Like, I love these types of players. But the problem I have is, I do notice, this is another player, by the way, if we're doing the Hylissang guy, he's had a lot of fucking rookie junglers. He had Bo last year, and then now he's had fucking Douglas and now Lincoln. Like, he hasn't ever had like a Jankos type. He never had one of the elite junglers in the league. So I will put that out there, because I always do think people are a bit harsh when you forget that. Like, he is a fucking Korean playing in Europe, and I do think he's fabulous at lane. But the obvious issue is, like, first of all, it looks like actually this split might even be his worst split. Like, he's had some games that was a bit off, you know. Normally I'd expect him to win lane every time, look fabulous. Like, it's more the question of, like, how does he work with the team, right? The reason I bring this up is because in past splits, everyone did just blame the jungler. They just made it sound like if you just replace Douglas, it'll all be perfect, it'll all be elite. Well, it's clearly it can't just be that, right? So what are the other flaws in this team? Do you think Photon's having an issue with his split?
I think, like always, when you build rosters or like you adapt yourself to a meta, I think you always need to determine and decide who is going to be the actual role players. And I feel like Vitality tried so hard to be everything at the same time. Yes. Like the first initial week, they played the AD mids, AP jungles. They played the mixed bot lane. Sometimes they're playing Senna. Sometimes they're playing like the more IE heavy like crit ADs. Like Kazi can play it all. That's fine. And Hilly prefers to play melee supports, but it seems like they struggle in that process. Like the best example of this, of course, is like T1. It's like they work well when the role players can be jungle and mid. When the role players need to come from top or support, all of a sudden these players look much weaker. Like if we see Korea playing Rel or Alistar, even like when they won the World Championship, the big wake-up call was the loss against Genji when Korea was playing Alistar, because they can't make jungle super work together. So I always go to this example of how important it is to have players that actually are capable of creating space, building information within the game. And I feel like Vitality is missing that, you know. It's like they're missing the player that is going to give them structure through the draft, and I think that Photon as a player, I think that you don't want him to ever be in a position where he should be playing like, let's say for example, the Scanner. Like I don't want him to be that guy. And I think as long as they, like as you mentioned yourself, is the jungle situation together with Photon, there's never been like a very strong pairing. And I think when you look back at Vitality, when he played with Photon and Bo played together, it's like they tried to piece it together. It's like I think from outside, it was easy to say, yo, this team, they are putting Bo on tanks. They're trying to piece it together in a way that makes sense for them. And sometimes they try to do everything at once. I remember there was that one game they played like Kindred, Ari, Gwen, Lucian, Nami, and Lucian Milio, and they just lost that game, and then they just dropped any carry jungle forever just because they were like, shit, we need to make our comp make sense. But there needs to be a buy-in to everyone's identity on the team, especially in this format, because you're playing for 3 weeks, and if there's not a buy-in from like the 2-3 weeks of preparation that you have leading up to the split, and you're finding yourself when everybody else is like, oh, we're committed to this idea that we have, like GX. Like GX is like, oh, De Antonio's playing tanks and Rumble. It's like already the fact that there's a player that has a clear role on the team makes it so much easier for everybody else to play. Because even though I knew De Antonio maybe isn't the strongest player, it works super well on GX because he's committed to a role, and it makes everyone else's role so much more defined. And I think this is always the challenge that you need to deal with. And in the short time frame that is 3 weeks, 4 weeks, with super weeks after super weeks, you get kind of fucked over if you just miss the mark on this completely.
All right, here's my last question about Vitality then, because I actually just think at the moment they're just such a mess, there's not that much to talk about. My main question about Vitality is this. It's the last split. Like, the problem was, Yamato, if this was winter, I'm with you. Like, by the way, I've been baited by Vitality every fucking split so far, so it's okay. In winter, baited, I thought they'd at least be, like, top 4, top 3, they'd be solid. They didn't quite live up to what I wanted in that one. Then after that, it was like, okay, but you see Vethio's coming along, like, it's developing, it's getting better. Okay, and now Hylissang's not hinting. Okay, fuck, all we need is a jungler. You change the jungler, like you say, even better. Like, I agree with you. It couldn't have been better media in that off-season around MSI. Like, the whole thing of like, oh my God, and now even Kami Corp's fighting for the player we want. Oh my God, he must be sick. Everyone wants him. He's super. He's guaranteed to win. And that's like, oh, but he's actually like friends with Pad. And I'm like, oh, this is the dream. They're ticking all the boxes, all the hype's there. So you finally come, and it's arguably as bad as it's ever been in Vitality. They might be at the worst they've been all year. So here's the question. There's not that much time, like you say. Are they actually going to turn it around, this squad? Because I've got to say, Yamato, this is the one where I want to believe. Like, by the way, I still think Ghazi's plays really well. I don't actually think he's have any problems. The joke is, despite his career reputation, he's actually the one reliable element that does pretty much do his best every game. But I'll tell you what, he's in a bad fucking spot. So I have to say, when I look at them now, Yamato, like, my faith isn't eternal, mate. I've sort of given up on this team a little bit at this point.
Yeah. No, I'm with you. I don't think. I think. Like, I played with the scenarios a little bit, and there's a scenario where we have like a 4-way tie because like head-to-head and strength of schedule is exactly the same. And I think in a world where they have to play like some BO1s backs against the wall, I could see Vitality like pulling it through with like experience alone. And I think that they could probably make it to the next stage, but the ambition is way higher than that. I think both of us had the same expectations. Like, I put on my tier list my expectations for Vitality. I think I put them third, right below Fnatic and G2, of course. And in my mind, I think that the problems run a little bit too deep, and I think that I don't see it being solvable. Like, this is something that when I think of how they are as players, I think that they're too deep into their identity for them to reshape that. It's like, we can define Photon, I can define Vethio, we can define Hilly, and I think that in terms of how the roster is constructed, it just doesn't make sense. Like, they needed like a Niski in there. They needed a Jankos in there. They needed someone to piece it together. Maybe, I know people are not so hot on Perks, but Perks could be someone that drives, like a structure within the game that could go far. Just someone that doesn't need to bring any flair or bravado, because the main success from Vitality when they look good is when they play mechanical fights well. There's no setup. It's like, wow, they just won this 3v5. Very cool. Nice Rumble, nice Alistair combo. But the issue is, like, why the fuck are we 3v5 in the first place, Sure. That is the main issue. And I think I don't see a world where they solve that. I can't see them breaking into like the top 4, the elite 4 of Europe.
I've just realised something, which is, I always used to think one of the reasons why actually coaching in League isn't that appealing is because, from knowing a lot of coaches, unless you are lucky enough to get the job at G2 or a Fnatic or that sort of a team, traditionally, and maybe Vitality, traditionally, you just don't get the top players is the worst part about it. So it's not like you're playing, we're like, it's Formula 1 and we're all in the same car. It's Formula 1 and one person's in a way better car than the other one, but then the fan doesn't know and he acts like you're supposed to just win the league with whoever you have. But I have to say, the one thing you're making me realise is, is I was too cynical. That's only in the early days you don't get the players. If you actually were in coaching at the right time period, it's actually frustrating, because what I realise now is, dude, you could have been on like the 7th best team in certain years, and because everyone else gives up on like mega players, you could just literally tell like, I think I will recruit Soaz, Perks, Upset. Like, these players would just be available. Like, holy shit, because I have to tell you about, if anyone follows sport, like the entire game of football pretty much is about managers who are on the top teams scouting players like that who were once amazing, and you have to try and figure out, because some of them obviously will eventually turn it around and come back again. If you can do that, that's the secret always to going back to the top. Because the problem with the RL approach, which obviously has made people like Mac very famous, bringing these players up, is you can't hit the lottery every time. Like, they've already done an insane job with how many people they've brought through and developed and put in the right role. Eventually you're going to have times where it's a bust, it doesn't work, you know. Meanwhile, like, it might be difficult to sort of like get the old horse back on its legs, as it were, but if you do, you know what you get from it, because they bring all the experience and all that. Because as you say, people will laugh there, Yamato, like, he's just being biased with Perks. It's like, yeah, but we're not talking about G2. We're not saying replace Caps. We're saying like he could plug a hole in the problems they have in the system in a team like Vitality, which I think is a fair comment, because I agree with you. Of all the 3 carry players, the one who was the least relevant is Vethio, and he plays the most important role in the game in theory in that sense, you know. I'm with you, it's just a bit of a bomber. It's why this team never feels like the engines get going, because I'm with you, the mid game is where they go to die. That is where Vitality games go to die, no matter what the lead is, no matter what the lane in. To see more cool, funny, interesting clips based on topics from my content, well, subscribe to this channel then, or, you know, be a pleb and don't.